Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be talking about credential abuse, why, how, and what you can do about it. There are a few things
Whoops.
we'd like you to know.
One of which is how to operate this thing, which clearly I'm not good at.
Things for you to know. Livestorm, which is the platform we're on, is a lot of fun. And we begin all of our webinars with you with your sound on mute. If you can't hear us, click on the screen to turn on the sound. Your microphone will remain muted, but please use the chat to talk to us. I'll be watching and really excited to interrupt our team here to ask them your questions. If the alerts are too much, you can mute them by clicking on the bell. It's on the right-hand side, and you will automatically get a recording. But if you want the presentation slides, please email ellie.miller@criticalinsight.com. So without further ado, let's talk about our today's speakers. Mike Hamilton, who is a Critical Insight founder with our other co-founder, Fred Langston. And if you haven't been with us for our previous webinars, you are in for a treat. Mike is our CISO and the former CISO of Seattle, and Fred is our Chief Product Officer here at Critical Insight, both with tremendous backgrounds. Check out the website to look at their bios for a little bit more information. And without further ado, Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, speaking about tremendous backgrounds, my background is a hotel room in Vancouver, Washington. So hello from there. I am attending the Association of Washington Cities. I see Doug Evans is here. So Doug, I don't know why you're not here. So as you know, if you attend these things, we're not here to sell you stuff. We're here to tell you stuff. And this is something that has increased in importance and frequency. And so we thought it's a good time to talk about this and maybe talk about some of the things that you can do to avoid this, because there are things you can do to avoid this. And we're going to tell a couple of stories about things that have happened to us to illustrate what could be happening to you. So credential abuse, okay, account takeover. This is showing up in the news more and more and more. If you get the daily news blast from Critical Insight, you will notice those articles are appearing more and more. When I say it's now at parity with other methods, there's always phishing to get a password, but for a period of time, there's been an increase in the frequency of vulnerability exploit and really rapid vulnerability exploit right after a patch has been announced and distributed. And now it really looks like this is kind of bouncing back, and we're really getting into account takeover, credential abuse full time here. So, credential abuse, right, is an initial access vector. It's a way to get in. The objective of doing that is not having access to your account. It's being able to get into the network, elevate privileges, pivot around, find the stuff, do ransomware, deploy crypto miners, things like that. So if we can cut this off right at the initial access, right, by some of the controls that we'll talk about, your chances of getting ransomware go down. So that's good. Just a few news articles, right? All of these appear in the daily news blast. 83% of organizations had this happen. This has happened to us. This has happened to our customers. We see this happening. Here's IBM saying every third attack is abusing valid accounts. There were reasons for this, and some of those reasons are people pick dumb passwords. Some of the reasons are there's lots of passwords stolen, and people share passwords between services, right? We'll talk about that. And as you know, as you likely have read, this account takeover in Microsoft Azure has hit Microsoft executives and actually allowed them to pivot into high-level U.S. federal government accounts and steal secrets from there. And here we see account takeovers outpace ransomware as top security concern. The reason I put that last article in there is because that one is dumb. Okay, account takeovers outpace ransomware. They're different things. Account takeover gets me initial access into the network to deploy the ransomware or to steal the records or to deploy the crypto miner. It's not the end all be all. So I won't tell you what news agency that was, but that one's dumb. All right, so here's why this has become prevalent, and this is why this is increasing, and this is why we all need to be aware of this. It's easy, right? I can watch the patches as they're being announced by Cisco or Fortinet or a Checkpoint or whoever, and grab the patch, rapidly do a reverse engineering to to find out what it fixes so that I can engineer an exploit to break that thing, package it up, hopefully get it to a user to bite on it, or go straight after that system and take that system over, right? Cisco, Fortinet, right? Remote access methods, this has all happened to them. Or I can guess your password and walk into the network, all right? It doesn't take a lot of skills to do this. You can just guess passwords, and frankly, there are certain demographics in the United States that are very, let's say, just not up to speed on your own personal security controls. So for a lot of people, guessing a password is really easy, and you're probably going to get a hit. When I say get a hit, when we talk about disclosed credential dumps, so for example, Yahoo lost 1 billion passwords right as they were going through an acquisition, which did not help their valuation. The billion password database, a lot of people have that. We have that. And if we go through the billion passwords and you were a Yahoo user and we find your name in there, and then we try that same password with your Bank of America account or your PayPal account or your Amazon account, we might just get a hit because you shared passwords. Or we can use all the passwords disclosed in one of those dumps and try all the passwords with your account or every user in your organization. This is happening all the time. Yes, people reuse passwords. Password hygiene is very bad unless you attend webinars like this and somebody, shakes their finger at you. People pick easily guessed passwords. We'll talk about that in a second. And multi-factor authentication is not as prevalent as we would want it to be, despite it being included in every standard of practice and all the regulatory requirements. Still, we're finding that multi-factor authentication is not being as pervasively used as it needs to be. So this is why this is now a bigger problem than it has been in the past. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some examples of who's been affected here. You probably are aware of some of these. Okta, absolutely. Credential stuffing. So credential stuffing is, I'm going to take that billion password database. I'm going to try every one of them with your account. And when I get to about 752, I'm going to get a hit. Right? United Healthcare. The United Healthcare CEO has been accused of negligence, and we don't know if that's going to go forward like that, but that kind of accusation really gets a lot of people's attention because they didn't have multi-factor authentication on their Citrix remote access method. Okay, that is a real lapse. Snowflake, their customers did not enable multi-factor authentication, and passwords were stolen from other places and then used. And so Snowflake, who is a big, they're like Amazon, they're a big database in the cloud, and they do a lot of business analytics. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of customers, and those that did not use multi-factor authentication, for example, Ticketmaster, right? These have all been compromised now. And then we talked about Microsoft Azure and successfully phished customers going all the way up into the federal government and very high levels in the federal government. And now they have been excoriated by Congress for that. And Fred, you have something to say about this?
Yeah, I want to point out the how bad how bad the impacts can be. The United Healthcare, essentially by not having multi-factor authentication, really is probably the core control that was missing. We have one of the largest breaches in American history. Our over all of our service members' records are now in the hands of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, so they can use that against our armed forces. The impacts, we all know the impacts to provision of healthcare pretty much put this country in a state of disruption, where we were actually living through a period where people could not get health care. They expect that we can look back and attribute a number of deaths to that. So this is something that rolled from a lack of a very basic control into one of the biggest impacting breaches A third of all Americans are affected. All of our service members, people have died. So these basic controls, people, have to be put in place. The snowflake one, I also want to comment. That was the users of the snowflake environment. Okay, we don't want to cast blame on Snowflake, but you may say, well, gee, Snowflake, maybe you should require your cloud users to use multi-factor authentication. And there's a precedent for that. Amazon is now requiring everyone, just right now, to, if you have an Amazon account, it's going to be multi-factor, you don't get in. So maybe part of this is we need downward pressure from the big cloud providers, and certainly we need people to do a basic level of diligence around things like United Healthcare.
Yeah, I think that's a really good recommendation, because if it's not downward pressure, bubbling up means we have to teach people about this, and there's a certain cutoff under which we can't reach those people to teach those people. So yeah, I think downward pressure is the way to go. The low end methods of doing this are, again, pretty easy. I mean, if you're gonna start guessing passwords for somebody's account somewhere, there's the top 10. All right, and for real, if your password is password on any service, and I don't think anybody that's attending this has a password, but really a lot of people do. And so when they say these are the top 10 passwords, there is a large database of passwords that have been found in these password dumps. They're all listed there. Again, if you start going through all of those and trying every one of these in succession with someone's account, you're gonna get a hit. So either you have never changed your default password, phishing, maybe you gave up a password because you thought it was a SharePoint login, phishing, somebody can, get it over the phone. There's SMS phishing now. Have you send you a link with no context that, you click and it's like a Microsoft login or something like that. And again, the password guessing, also known as a dictionary attack, right? So I could try lots and lots and lots of words, because people use words, and then dumps of stolen passwords. Fred, anything about that?
Yeah, I just want to. There are some great charts to look out. We don't have it here on the web about how long it takes with a modern computer, nothing fancy, maybe a nice GPU, to crack passwords. If you actually have stolen the hashes or the password, or captured a hash being passed in transit, cracking those, like an 8-character password complex, it's still only 30 minutes. We have to really start thinking about, yeah, we have to go to very long passwords, probably complex passwords. And the way to do that is using things like password vaults. And we'll talk about that later. But we're at an age where this is more complex than a human being can manage. So we have to lean into technology.
Yep. Okay. All right. So kind of in the middle, right? So like password guessing, dictionary attacks. In fact, in the middle, I would say, lifting a password file from, for example, a Linux system, some Unix-based system, well-known algorithms store those passwords in those files, and you can just go to work and decrypt those. It does take a while. As computing power goes up, it takes less and less time. Those passwords need to become passphrases and get very long, but still you need multi-factor authentication. So again, credential stuffing is one way to do this. And credential stuffing is I'm going to use every password in this database against your account until I finally get it. That's credential stuffing. There's a way to do that in a low and slow method, where threat actor will try every one of your users at your organization in succession with every password. So I take password number 1 and I do user 1. Nope. User 2. Nope. User 3. Then start over. Password 2. User 1. User 2. User 3. Finally, you're going to get a hit. And if you get in that way, it doesn't really matter what account you have access to, because once you're in, there are tools to grab other passwords off the wire, elevate privileges, pivot, do things like that. That's credential stuffing and what it leads to. You can cause MFA fatigue. So if I am trying to get into your account and you do have multi-factor authentication and I do have your password, it's going to generate that challenge for the second factor. And if I do that over and over and over and over and over and over to someone, finally they're going to go, I'm tired. Go ahead. And this actually works. And then there's info stealers. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is, we have implemented policy here around this. And as Fred alluded to, a password vault. So these info stealers are out there on rigged websites, right? So websites are injected so that they have additional information in a record that you might look up. So you're getting a little present on the side that you don't know about. And an unpatched browser, and Chrome goes bad like every 3 days, and you hit one of those websites and someone will try to draw you to that website, right? That's called a watering hole attack, right? And all you got to do is hit the website and all those credentials come right out of your browser, right? And this is becoming very prevalent now. So a prohibition on storing credentials in browsers is a really good policy recommendation. And again, we're talking about Chrome and Edge, which is actually based on the Chromium code. There's probably 2 or 3 people that still use Firefox, and there are lots of browsers out there, and they all periodically need to be patched. It's easy to do. All you do is, restart it, and it patches itself. But everybody's got so many tabs open, they really don't want to do that. I don't think I want to say any more about that. Virginia, is there a question?
Well, there's one thing really quickly that I think some of our audience might benefit from knowing, which is if you are like me and you really enjoy keeping all of those tabs open because you're going to come back to them, I like to call them my security blanket tabs. It's really helpful to know that when you actually update, everything will reopen for you. So don't be afraid. It didn't always used to work this way, but now it does. Don't let that be something that keeps you from, keeping your browser up to date. And also, I'll just have my own little joke here for you, which is I thought MFA fatigue was every time I have to find my phone somewhere buried on my desk to be able to then log into all my different things. So slight definition of MFA fatigue is a little different for me. Back to you guys.
And I will just say that I have seen how many tabs you have open, and your computer must have more memory than any other computer I've ever seen.
I'm going to join a support group for open tabs issues. So
moving on. All right, so here's what credential stuffing is, and they're it's not a user behind a keyboard generally doing this. So, right, there's this collection of stolen credentials, right? The Yahoo password dump, for example, and there are lots of them out there. And you'll notice that there are bots involved. And this is because this is happening at such a rate that a person cannot do this. Even if it's a single computer running a script to go password, 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 it's going to take forever. I mean, we're talking 1 billion passwords here, right? So in general, bots are used. We all have login failures. If some organizations have policies where if you get 3 login failures within 5 minutes, you're going to get locked out, or at least for a period of time, you'll get benched. That's why the low and slow attack, user 1, user 2, user 3, nobody gets 3 login failures in 5 minutes. No one is alerted to this because they don't get locked out or benched. And this can go reasonably unnoticed if you're not doing a lot of monitoring in your network. So login failure, if you are using multi-factor authentication and you have an authenticator app, you can always look at this. So I use the Microsoft Authenticator app, and there's a recent activity link there, and it will show you the unsuccessful logins that you have. So here's one for me from Hebei, China. And the reason I show you this is not to say I got a login failure, because that's a day of the week ending in Y, really. But this was going on every 20 seconds for days and days and days. So this is me, okay? Because we have basically talked a lot about things going on in China and what China does in terms of espionage and intellectual property theft, things like that. And apparently they didn't like that. So this is coming, if you see, and I know these are pretty small images, right? But that's Kuwait, Moscow, China, India. There's another China there. And again, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these every 20 seconds, if you can see the timestamps on there, and they're coming from all over the world. These are not synchronized people behind keyboards. These are compromised computers that are all running a big distributed application for specifically this purpose. So I would encourage folks to go interrogate your Authenticator app to see if this has been going on to you. If it has, I would say you have been targeted in some way. All right, on the very high end. Okay, so that was kind of mid-range, and maybe the bot network is maybe a little on the high end too, but definitely SIM swapping. So SIM swapping, I convince your telecom provider that I am you. And it's easy to go out on the internet and use certain services to, scrape enough information about somebody to impersonate them. And I say, look, I was on a ferry and I was going across Puget Sound, and I had my phone out and I was taking a picture of Mount Rainier, and an orca jumped up and ate my phone. So this is my new phone, and I would like you to connect my old phone number to this. And if I can convince your telecom provider to do that, I'm now holding your phone. And I can go to your Gmail account and say, forgot my password. And it'll say, what's the code that just came on your phone? And I gotcha, right? And it doesn't matter if it's Amazon, PayPal, Bank of America, financial institution X, that works. And that's why SIM swapping is a little more prevalent now than it ever was in the past. And this is a technique used by a gang called Scattered Spider that I'll reference here again in a second. There's active session token stripping. And I'm going to explain that in some detail in a second as well. But there's threats of violence. Now, this Scattered Spider group in particular, and they've arrested a couple of them at this point. They were the ones that did Caesars and what was the other casino, Fred?
It was MGM.
MGM, right. Caesars and MGM. And what we found out about them, these are Gen Z 20-somethings, early 20-somethings, late teenagers, early 20-somethings. And because they are primarily in the US and UK, not in Russia, Ukraine, where a lot of typical cybercrime comes from, they are domestic. And that means domestically, they have physical proximity to you. And so when they are threatening you with violence, if you don't give up a password, they mean it. Bricks have gone through windows. There have been other violent episodes around this gang. And this is a very, very bad trend. Fred, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I want to tie this to you mentioned Caesars. Scattered Spider called their help desk, right? This all really started with them calling a help desk and convincing the help desk employee that they actually worked for the casino, which then allowed them to get a password reset, which then allowed them to get in. There was a SIM swap as part of this as well, but it is a lot easier to get that password either through phishing or through social engineering or any number of ways, or cracking it, or you've used a shared password. That's why MFA is so critically important. And that's why it's so dangerous when you have a SIM swapping. You have the password, you have the second factor, you have game over. And a lot of people even are running their Bitcoin accounts off their phones. And there's been a lot of Bitcoin stolen exactly through this SIM swapping method. So it's not just a corporate threat, it's also a personal threat.
It is. And, cryptocurrency wallets, right, that you access from your phone, that's one of the main reasons that SIM swapping occurs. So what's the take-home message here? If your phone ever stops working for no explainable reason, contact your telecom provider. And Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, they have pretty good controls in place for this now, but it still happens. Contact your telecom provider and say the following: have there been any changes recently made to my account? Right, Fred?
Yeah, and another thing that people make a mistake on, if you create your secret questions and it's your dog and it's things that anyone can look up publicly online, well, the bad guys know that, folks, right? They can get all that information. It's all public. So if you're going to use something, a trick people will use is when they ask me what school, that first elementary school do I go to, I'm going to call it Jackson Elementary, but I have never been to a Jackson Elementary. But I'm going to use that at every place because it's something people cannot look up. It's something I've made up, right? So a lot of people are saying if you get secret questions where your identity can then your password can be reset, don't answer it with questions that people can find out. Don't even use it things that are actually true. Use things that you preset as these are going to be my answers that are utterly random to these questions. That way they can't be guessed or socially engineered.
That's right. The color of my first car was chartreuse. Okay. All right. So we're going to dive into this a little bit because this is kind of interesting. So, and we've seen this up close and personal, and I'll tell you the story about that. So, session token. All right. So you're online. You've authenticated. You've given the second factor. You have access to SharePoint and Teams and all this stuff in Microsoft, and all of a sudden a phishing message comes in. And if somebody bites on the link, and I know that there are a lot of people who go, I'm not going to give up a password, but I just want to see the website they set up that looks like SharePoint and see the actual URL and report it or do something. You do a little investigation. And, we're a company full of security professionals, and our folks do that, right? We give them phishing tests, and it's like, dude, I was never going to give up a password. I was just, look at it. Today, if you just hit the link, if you were just curious and you just hit the link, you are interacting with a script that will grab that session token off of there, present that to Microsoft, and Microsoft will go, hey man, great session, never seen your device before, here's the challenge for the second factor, routed back to the user that hit the link, bammo. And the bait that they use is an actual Microsoft link. What you don't know is that this code is buried beneath the link that has you interacting with a script. It'll say it's going to Microsoft, and eventually you will go to Microsoft, but it is interacting with that script, and it's going to do this nasty thing. So take home here, don't investigate phishing links. Do not. Unless you're on a boombox or a burner or something that you can completely torch and not worry about. So when this happens, whoever is now in interactive control of this session, and there are people that are notified when somebody bites on these things, they have O365, SharePoint, and notably your single sign-on applications, which can be a lot of things. So this is extremely dangerous, and this is very prevalent right now. So definitely be aware of this. And so I'm just going to tell you a true story. Before I tell you the story, Fred, you want to add anything to that?
No, I was going to tell the story, and then I may add to it.
Okay, so this happened to us. And before I tell you the story, I want to preface this with we monitor our network just like we monitor customers. We have access to all the Microsoft alerts. There are a lot of people that get these alerts from Microsoft, and we all act on those very quickly. So the story I'm going to tell you resulted in no harm, no foul, okay? Because we had this fire put out very quickly. So user comes in very early in the morning, working on that first cup of coffee, and gets a message, you're at 99% storage. Setting aside that is a tactic that everybody knows about, all right? It had a real Microsoft link there, okay? Go to the Microsoft Resource Center. So user clicks for the Microsoft Resource Center, and again, the session token was pulled off, presented to Microsoft. Microsoft says, that's a great valid session, but I've never seen your device before, so I have to challenge you with the second factor, routed back to the user who says yes, because they don't understand. They're already logged in. They've already gone through multi-factor authentication, and that should not be happening, okay? So then the interactive user is now involved, okay? While the user actually did go to the Microsoft resource page, the Resource Center, all right? Now somebody is able to access that account, search through the email, searched for the string invoice, found a couple, set up an auto forwarder in this person's email account, and then gins up a couple of dummy invoices to send out to a couple of customers. Now, here was the thing. So turns out we've changed our names a bunch of times. We were the absurdly named MK Hamilton and Associates. We became Critical Informatics. We were then CI Security, and now we're Critical Insight. And Bad guy has no idea about any of this and sent an invoice to, and I'm not making this up, Critical Informatics, AP at Critical Inf. So, okay, all over the place, bells are going off. We know this is going on. We've already gotten the alert from our SOC that somebody set up an email forwarder. We got the alert from Microsoft that this has happened. All this happened in less than 10 minutes. Fewer than 10 minutes is all this took, including sending out the faking. So, what was the objective here, Fred?
The objective was to get access to invoices that they can then do a business email compromise with our client or our vendors that are receiving bills from us that are going to pay, or vice versa. Maybe we're getting a bill from them, but it's going to redirect that money
Yep.
to an account in Ukraine or China or someplace like that.
Yep, that was it. Business email compromise, and that's one of the objectives of this particular account takeover technique. So again, you get a phishing message. Don't hit the link. Do not investigate. You want to add anything to this, Fred?
Yeah, so we certainly chatted with this user when this event occurred, and the reality was this person had received and had needed multiple interactions where they did an MFA request that morning. So having another one come was like, oh, I just thought it was part of the other ones that I did earlier today, and maybe I was behind. So remember, these things pop up. They may pop up in the context of normal day-to-day activities, right? And if you've hit it 5 times that day, when it comes up the 6th time, you probably think, wow, that took a long time to come across. Yes. So it's easier to press that button than you may think. I just want to make sure people understand that.
Yeah. And so, by the way, our process when something like this happens is we go through full formalized problem management. We are in contact with our customers that may have been affected. And so when I say 2 invoices went out, one went to us, one went to another customer, they immediately said, hey, this don't look right. And we were in contact with them right away. Okay. All right. So we have talked about all kinds of bad things that bad people are doing, including bad people who pick passwords that are easy to guess. Virginia, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, just on your last point, one of the things that I think that's important for people to be aware of is that employees just can make mistakes and that these things do happen. And one of the things that we offer at Critical Insight is our security awareness trainings. And our next one is actually tomorrow.
Oh, yeah,
so if you want to come check out our free security awareness trainings, it's a great way. It's free. Please come check it out. And you'll get to hear Mike talk a little bit more about these different ways that you can additionally avoid disaster. But back to you, Mike.
All right. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about what do we do here. All right.
All right.
Fred, so you have control.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, I think I jumped in there. So what can you do? The first thing immediately that you always want to do if you suspect credentials have been compromised or there potentially are active sessions is immediately terminate all sessions. So if you're a O365 M365 user, you go into your profile or your admins go to your profile, and there's a button down there at the bottom that says disconnect from all sessions. That is race to that button, press that button as quickly as possible. Don't count on people saying, oh, I logged out of Exchange, I logged out of, that doesn't mean anything, especially in a world where your Edge browser, if you're using Microsoft SSO, federated sign-on to software as a service apps all across the internet, you will still be logged in with those credentials to those software as a service applications if you do not hit the terminate all sessions button. So this is critical. Everybody should know that if I believe these credentials are compromised, log out and then start making people change their passwords. So the process should be immediate. This is the process you go through. Then you need to go back and look at, as Mike talked about, what actually did a bad person, a bad actor do, right? If we have regulatory drivers, certainly HIPAA. If you're in banking, FFIEC, you're in defense contracting, CMMC, CJIS, if you're in law enforcement, you're going to have to understand the extent of what happened. You need to know, what did they look at? Mike said, we looked through and what did this attacker look at to once they got in, and we determined it was a minimal footprint. They'd done very little. We were able to contain that. But at the very least, you will have to use this as the basis of your breach risk assessment. What happened? How bad is it? Do we have any reporting requirements? Do we lose PAI? Do I need to report so it gets to the board and it's an SEC finding? Because now we have something that we need to report publicly about a publicly traded company. So this next step is really critically important. You can't stop at, hey, we've stopped the problems. Got to figure out what happened and what they've done. So we look for things like auto forwarding rules, right? The first thing they love to go in there and do is kind of take over where that email is going. They want to get in the middle of any conversation. So business email compromise thrives on sitting in the middle, watching a communication. As soon as it's, here's the invoice, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to change that banking number. That routing number is now going to go to Ukraine, and it gets finally sent over to the victim. They pay it, none the wiser, because it's an invoice they see coming over the wire from the exact company that they should be receiving it from, and on it goes. It also allows them to maintain persistence. They can understand what's going on. They can even see if people are going, hey, user, it looks like your email account may have been compromised. Well, they are watching this in real time and can understand, do I need to do other things to maintain persistence? Do I try to use it and pivot to another account before they close down this one? Look at what's going outbound. Look at what type of stuff is moving outbound. And remember, they can look around on things like SharePoint, quite likely. And if we're talking about a Microsoft environment, with the federation of Microsoft applications, they might be looking at Power BI and getting business information. They could be looking at all sorts of things, contract repositories, things that are critical information you want to be protected. And then, as it says, you may need to report. One of the standard basis for breach reporting is email-based, right? Somebody's credentials are compromised. One or more or all credentials or personally identifiable information or sensitive information may be gone at that point. So there are requirements now. If you are in fact in critical infrastructure, you will use the CERCIA method of reporting to the CISA. And I do want to tell people, this is a good thing. This is a new voluntary reporting. Why is it voluntary? Because they want you to reach out and actually they want to help now. Instead of what we used to expect, the government's going to come in and close things down and make it difficult. It's the opposite now. So report because they want to reach out and they want to help. So what else can you do? Okay, we talked about password vaults. I think this is foundational. I don't know how any human being could possibly remember the complex, long passwords, even if you use some of the mnemonic devices. If you've seen some of our security awareness training, we talk about some mnemonic devices to build complex passwords. I still don't have that capacity because every password should be unique. Absolutely. You don't reuse passwords ever. So use a password vault, preferably one that's also going to recommend strong passwords. So takes you out of the equation, right? It's using long, complex passwords, and it will remember them and store them and then present them when needed on your behalf. As
Hey,
Mike
Fred,
said,
real quick. Rob had a question about this actually and wanted to ask, how often should we be changing passwords? And I agree with him that there's probably not all at once because I know that would be just crazy, but maybe some information around complexity requirements. Any details around that you can share?
Sure. So, a lot of the standard password guidance is a little moldy, if you will. We've learned a lot about how easy it is to crack them, even if they are complex but short. So the real push now is to have lengthy passwords, 16 characters usually or greater, maybe 12 at a minimum. Again, complex, it should be as complex as possible because you're not going to be remembering them anymore. I don't care if it's letters, numbers, and characters that I can't possibly remember. Got a machine to help me do that. So best practice, I believe now, is highly complex passwords. They can be changed on a regular basis more often than if I have to think up a password and stop what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, as I logged into this platform for this session, I had to change my password Took me 2 keystrokes to enter I don't know what it was because my password vault created it, entered it, and stored it for me. Changed the password, put in a new complex ones, managed that process entirely for me. That way, get away from having a password even that you know about. That means then it comes down to one password, right? So that password to your password vault should be critical, should be long, should be complex, and should absolutely have multi-factor authentication as part of that process. And if
Yeah.
you're using MFA on something as critical as that, use something that usually uses more of a token-based authentication rather than SMS style, because SMS style is a little bit less secure.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd recommend there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
can, yeah,
let me follow up on that,
sure.
because it's so there's a password, okay, and Eric makes a really good point here. The number one factor in password entropy is length, okay, and so a real good tip, and this is my not only my personal feeling, but this is our policy, and maybe I shouldn't disclose this, but I'm going to. Because we are pervasive users of multi-factor authentication, we never force password changes, right? We do have a policy that says here's what the length needs to be. And a real good idea is to have the first line of a book that you can remember. So I'll just tell you this because it's not true anymore, but the master decryption key for a certain city where I used to work, where we had rolled out Symantec's version of PGP to everybody, was this: the galley is always at the Seattle end of the boat, right? If you've ever taken a ferry across Puget Sound, you know that's true, right? That's the kind of thing. So here, we don't force password changes. We have a length requirement, and then we use multi-factor authentication along with that. Some of the services, like Fred's talking about this platform, they force those changes on us. And when that happens, when you have to rotate through things like that, your password vault will make up a string of garbage that you don't even have to know. And that's a really good way to do this.
Absolutely. Conditional access policies are your friend. This is where you're saying this person logs in normally from California. Why is this person now logging in from Czechoslovakia? Why are they logging in at 4 a.m. when they've never logged in, or their working hours are not at 4 a.m. and they're not a on-call employee? Why are they using now admin credentials from this location when they never use admin credentials from that location before? It's always the corporate office they're using. It's not a cable modem out in some part of the nation. So you set up these policies, and they're meant to help you if somebody does in fact compromise these credentials. Chances are they're probably going to at least try initially from some location that is going to trigger some behavioral alert. I'm logging in from outside the country. I'm logging outside normal hours, doing things that are behaviorally unusual. So set up these conditional access policies as another line of defense, that if people are either compromised credentials and are coming from a place they shouldn't, or if they're trying to pound on the front door, right? We want to stop them from pounding, right? Yes, billions of hits every day off the firewall, all of the banging on the front door, but you don't want our email accounts like Mike's getting hammered, right? So let's stop that hammering from happening, right? We can do that with conditional access policies. Again, and we said monitor for alerts on impossible travel. These are essentially one of the things you're monitoring as part of a conditional access policy. Threshold login failures. This is an interesting one. As Mike talked about, when they're using the more common methods, especially blasting on the internet, they're going to roll through hundreds of usernames, each trying a particular unique password, and then they're going to roll through that list again, take some 5-10 minutes to go through the list, never triggers any threshold. So there is questions as to what is appropriate here. It could be, there was a lot of settings around 10 failed logins is the time to cut them off. Some people have said, Mike said 3 is appropriate. Well, if we're in a world where all of our users are using password vaults, nobody's fat fingering passwords. So maybe it's a good idea to lower that threshold down to maybe 3, because probably shouldn't be more than 1, right? It's, hey, I'm using an old password and I need to update my password, right? That's the 2 attempts right there. You're not going to get to the 3rd to get locked out. So if you're using something like that, everybody's using it. You now have the ability to go, let's dial that down. If you don't, you probably have to leave it around 10. Give people a chance to make mistakes. I know occasionally I'll fat finger things up to 5 times, about once a year. I'll do something like that. Maybe I got a blister on my finger and I'm not typing right. So it's hard to say where you should set it. Try to get it as low as possible if you've got technology that makes that possible. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but the dark web, right? That's where your stolen credentials and usernames and accounts all go to live and die and get sold and traded and put up on markets. So we're going to talk in a little bit about how far you can go with that. And one of the main places to do that, if you don't know already, is Have I Been Pwned, which is a hacker way of saying, have I been hacked? Have my credentials been compromised? You go and enter a username. It'll tell you if it has credentials associated with that. You can enter a password. You say, is this password in my database of hashes or cracked passwords? And it'll figure those things out. So, you want to use the power of the web and the dark web, kind of like the bad guys do. You can do it on your own. You can use a Tor, right? That is the Tor network, right? The Onion Router network that allows you to remain anonymous. You pass through all sorts of gateways. You get kind of hidden behind all this obfuscation. You use a tool called an Onion browser. And then you can go to dark web search sites, right? And they will say, I want to look at the latest stuff coming from Scattered Spider. And it quite possibly will point you to some site. You may get admission to it. You may not, depending. Sometimes you need a recommendation. But you can go look and see what is up there. Are my credentials out there, right? A good way to, though, again, to do it is use tools that can help you to do this. So the kinds of things at Virginia, I have a question.
Well, before we jump on, I wanted to get, before we got too far, we've got a lot of questions coming into the chat regarding the different ways that we might consider geofencing. And so I know as we kind of talk about jumping and traveling into the deep dark web, maybe you can come back and loop around to that. And Mike, I know that you had some thoughts around this as well. So Fred, I'll let you continue your thought, but can we come back to that before we move on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Geofencing it's an interesting topic for sure. So I do want to point out, though, if you're going to go look at any of these open source information, open source intelligence places to find out if your credentials are out there, remember that you're still going to miss reused domain passwords on compromised personal accounts. As Mike mentioned, if I have flankston@hotmail.com and my password is the same as fred.langston@criticalinsight.com, the bad guys know if I'm going for somebody Flankston and I see that username that looks like it could be Flankston, I'm going to use that password. And chances are they're going to get in. So you will miss this if you're looking around the dark web to know that, hey, I didn't know my user was using the same password at both places. But what kind of tools can you use to help you? Two of the most famous, the ones you probably heard of, Maltego. Maltego is an open source intelligence tool with over 80 extensions. Meaning it allows you to search through millions of APIs, not millions, 80 plus APIs and data sources, collect the information and bring it back in a usable format. Spiderfoot is another tool, open source. Both of these are open source. And Spiderfoot has about 79 API connections. What do you pay for when you use these tools? The API connection. You have to get a subscription usually. If you're going to pay for 79 APIs, about 50% of those are paid, 50% are free. Just go with the free ones. A lot of them will connect you. Things like Have I Been Pwned will allow you about 5 requests a day. So if you're judicious, you can live on a free account, right? Slowly work through your user base, 5 people at a time, 5 at a time every day. So you use either Maltego, Spiderfoot, or there's an OSINT framework that the government uses and the government puts out that allows you to go collect all this information in a single place. The most common place, if you want to get started, you want the easy button, go to Have I Been Pwned, go ahead, play a little bit there. You can enter your own information in there, find out what you can see. But do more than just looking for your name. Look at company, say, I want to see everybody from criticalinsight.com that is at Have I Been Pwned, right? That's what you want to do. Or I want to say everybody that's fred.langston at some user, some domain, I want to look at every place that is a fred.langston that has ever been in these databases to see if then there's a password that's associated with me or something like that. You want to look at usernames. Sometimes you want to search for password hashes. So you might want to know your password hashes, which is not a bad thing, right? Because you're not telling the people, this is my password, do you have it? You're saying, here's my encrypted hash that you don't know how to decrypt. And do you have that hash there? So look for hashes as well. And then there are commercial breach detection services that are becoming very popular where you can go and enter all sorts of information about your organization to find out whose email addresses are out there and how are they being used, what passwords may be out there, how's my domain name being used, are there people squatting on domain names very similar to mine, all sorts of information you can gather out there. I recommend people start slow, start with some of these open source tools, do a couple of the runs yourself. It's real easy to get started. You will be shocked at what you will find out about these things. They're part of what we call attack surface, right? Attack surface management is a key area everybody's moving to, and this is a key component of that, is understanding what your external footprint and the information associated with you, your organization, and your accounts actually looks like. And I want to kind of close up quickly here on privileged access management. And that means anytime we're using elevated privileges on an account, admin account, maybe a backup operator account, which has direct access to our backups. Boy, a great thing for a bad guy with ransomware to have. I can now encrypt the backups along with the rest of the network, right? So anytime you're using elevated privileges, you should look into a system to help manage those. And there are tools out there that can manage it, everything from creation of the accounts, the credentials, even the commands that those privileged accounts can actually run, can be controlled. So we want to talk about using these to manage the people, manage the machines, right? There's technology components. And if you look at Gartner, there are 4 areas that people talk about. We talked about password vaults. Well, there's enterprise credential vaults for all the API secrets and tokens and all those kinds of things that really I don't want anyone at my organization to know. Once I get them, I don't want that to be put away and never seen by anybody, including my own team, because the vault will use it whenever it needs to be used and use it in a secure fashion. How about when I need to privilege elevation and delegation? Think about sudo. This is like sudo on steroids, right? It's how do we manage people when they move up from a regular user account, and what can they do? And this all ties into the cloud. Everything now has a cloud component, which probably also ties into your cloud access security broker. So you see a full identity ecosystem here. Privileged access management is one component we suggest you look into, because if they can control privileged accounts, they own you, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Okay, we're at the end.
So, Fred, I want to go back to our travel alerts. And so I know that a lot of people are working remote nowadays, although some people are being brought back into offices. Can we talk a little bit about what it's like to maybe potentially geofence for your organization? And Mike, I'd like you to answer this one as well, too. But Fred, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of it starts with your policies, right? If you have people that are allowed to use VPNs, and they're using them for any number of reasons, potentially to see literature in Europe that will not show up on an American website, which may be a common usage of it. Now you have a problem, right? You have to know where those VPN endpoints may be exiting those VPNs. And if they're in foreign countries, you're constantly going to be tripping things like impossible travel. So we have a challenge around VPN usage. They're very popular. Some things are being enforced automatically on phones where they're automatically using VPNs and they're not exiting at the same location. So you can try to map VPNs. You probably need a policy that says everybody use the same VPN. In fact, you probably want to supply that VPN and manage that, so then you can then tie that into your geofencing approach. But if you don't have that, or if you don't have that problem, you have to think about, of course, where your workforce is going to be working from. You're going to have a process to potentially relax those rules when people travel for business. I'm going to Eastern Europe because that's where business is. I need to be able to check my email, right? So we need a process to make sure people can travel when they do. And then you need to think about, maybe it's more than just the geofencing. It's geofencing plus some of the behavioral components, right, that can get you around some of these other things. So there's no one size fits all. Everybody's a little bit different, but I think it's driven a lot by policy and what your business operations look like as to how you can geofence a particular organization.
Yeah. Well, so our conditional access policy, we basically geofence to the United States. And, it's probably a better idea to make that as small as possible, geographically small as possible, and then combine that with impossible travel alerts, and which have gotten pretty sophisticated, right? Because they take into account timing. If you logged in at this time at this geographic location, it is not possible for you to be 500 miles away 20 minutes later and do a login, right? But as Fred said, the use of VPNs and things like that kind of muddies that. So that's why we make it the United States. It is unlikely that somebody's going to use an VPN exit point in Eastern Europe to access our network. So that makes it kind of easy. The other thing is, and I'm glad somebody brought this up, and Fred, you'll know why. It's really important that if one of your users, one of your employees is going to travel and wants remote access, they've got to report that. They've got to say that. And that way, they're going to be out of the country and where they're going to be coming in from. And the reason that this is important now is because our CEO is about to leave the country, and I don't think he's told the people he needs to tell, and he's about to get locked out. So we're going to have to fix that. So I would say there's those three things, right? You can geofence, right? And it's probably good to use the country. If you can make it smaller, that's great. But remember, people are going to use VPNs. Alert on impossible travel, and then tell somebody if you're going to leave the country, and make sure that there's policy in place to handle that. It's for a limited time, and you will open them up and not lock them out.
Yeah. Jake makes a great comment here. Everybody remember, we're done with IPv4. Everything new is going to be IPv6, and it has been a slipshod, maybe haphazard rollout at the telcos of where they're putting those ARNs that are associated with those. And geolocation has tons of false positives if you're basing it entirely on IPv6. So good point, Jake.
So I think that brings us to our close. And I know that Mike shared in the beginning that we are not here to, do more than, give you some of this education here in these webinars. But if you do need some help, we are here to offer cybersecurity as a service as well. So we will help you prepare, detect, and respond through a variety of means. And one of the other things I'd like to share with you is, just in case you are starting with no budget, because that is something that we are all facing, is that terrible budget crunches, everyone. If you want to start with something simple, I've just thrown this into the chat. If you want to start with yourself to look for some of these different password problems that we've seen, you can actually check out passwords.google.com, because a lot of people are using Chrome, and this will actually let you do a free test to see where you've been compromised. So before you kind of get into the tools and devices that can cost additional amounts, you can try that, and you can start at a personal level. So please stay connected with us. We do have a daily email that Mike has been writing for the last 15 years that is fantastic. He's curated all of this different IT security news. Please sign up. You can find it on our website. We also have our free monthly security awareness trainings, and the next one is actually tomorrow. So you can sign up on our website again at criticalInsight.org/events. And we have these regular urgent panel webinars and podcasts we're going to be kind of spinning up here in the summer. So please stay tuned and join us again. If you have any questions, this is Mike's email address. He's happy to hear from you. But also, Ellie Miller, who is the sender of the email that you received to invite you to this webinar, is ellie.miller at criticalInsight.com. And she's also going to drop a link in here for me for you to take a survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback, and let us know how we're doing. Give us some of the topics that you're interested in learning about. And thank you so much for spending your Thursday with us. We really appreciate your time. Final thoughts from you, Fred? Mike?
Final thoughts from me are, creds are keys to the kingdom, folks. Can't protect them, can't protect anything.
Yep. And I will say that two of the recommendations that I think are really, really important to employ is the use of a password vault, along with a prohibition on storing credentials in browsers, and there are group policies that you can implement to make sure that that is an actual prohibition and not just a policy statement.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Bye, everybody.